Welcome back to Psychology Applied to Work. This is lecture 32, Workplace Challenges. All right, last lecture, lecture 31, we started chapter 11, and we talked about workplace conditions, and that included types of workplaces, workplace design, environmental psychology, and then we talked about some of the different dimensions of the workplace, like lighting and color and music, climate, and then we're going to finish chapter 11 today. This should be actually a very short lecture. Chapter 11 is pretty straightforward, and we actually covered the majority of it in lecture 31. So this should be nice. And we're going to talk about workplace challenges. And those include how do you get people to, how do you schedule people, the pros and cons of the different types of work schedules, as well as work shifts and breaks and rest and fatigue, as well as commuting. All right, let's get into it. Work schedules. So working hours. A typical American work week's 40 hours. Everybody understands this. It could be salary, it could be wage. If you work more than 40 in your wage, you have to pay overtime per the government, for the law. If you're salaried, whether you work more than that really kind of depends on lots of stuff. But the norm in America is a 40-hour work week, but that is an American norm and not a universal norm. Lots of countries have different work schedules. In developing countries, less wealthy countries, it's actually common to have people work 5 days a week, even some places 6 days a week at factories and other things. But more than 40 and more than 5 days a week is not uncommon at all in developing countries. But amongst the developed or wealthy countries, the U.S. is actually on the harder working side. So if you compare on average now, a lot of variation in this, but on average, the American work week is 26% longer than the average Dutch work week and 31% more than the average German work week. Now getting into some terms, we're going to introduce a term called nominal working hours versus actual working hours. So the amount of hours you're supposed to work, like your 40-hour, 8 to 5, 40-hour work week. Your nominal working hours, the hours you're supposed to be there and supposed to be working, in that case would be 40. So your nominal hours are what it sort of looks like on paper that you're working, but the actual number of hours you work would be called the actual working hours. So maybe you didn't show up, maybe you were a little late, maybe you left early, maybe you took a long lunch, maybe you just did some non-work stuff, maybe you watched some YouTube videos. What's your actual work time? How much was social loafing or otherwise utterly unproductive from what you're being paid for? How much time you spent of that, in this case, work week, that was truly what the company said they're going to pay you for. That's your actual working hours. And it turns out that if you work part-time, you typically, as a percent, have higher average working hours. So if you work 20 hours a week, you might actually work 19 of those 20 hours. But if you work 40 hours a week, you might actually only work 35. There's a kind of a phenomenon that you can only stretch people's motivation and endurance so much. And the more you ask people to work, sort of the less productive they are for a given hour. So when you go and extend out work hours, and you add in overtime, whether that's paid overtime as a wage, or whether it's just, hey, we have to work through lunch and we have to work the weekend to get this done, if you're salaried, that actually ends up having diminishing returns. Yet longer work days, longer work weeks often ends up meaning that the pace slows down. That people can only sprint for so long, and sort of a natural aggregate effect in the work culture. If you have people there all the time, they're not usually hustling and bustling. So it's really not known what the optimum there is. That's why people, they're advocates for the 32-hour work week, or even like a 24-hour work week, and there are people that claim that that there's like an optimum value that, let's say you only work 3 days a week, say 3/8 a week, 24-hour work week. Boy, it seems like you'd get nothing done. But maybe you'd actually work really, really hard. That's something various countries, cultures, and companies are still trying to figure out, and there's really no consensus on what is that magical amount of time where people will really give their all, and what is the loss factor after that. And of course, it's highly dependent on the person and the commitment to the commitment to the organization, the conscientiousness of the person, the situation, how much you pay them, and their motivational states. It's really, really complicated. So there would never be one size fits all. But what is the best for a given company, organization within a given culture? It's still being determined. Just talking stats again here. I mean, overall working hours, the average work week for full-time is 40 hours, but a sizable amount, not quite 1 in 5, but 17% of the U.S. workforce works part-time. And then there's a thing called flex time, which, if you're full-time, you'd still be having to work 40 hours, but like when you come and go and what hours you're working, now we're getting into a little bit more on schedules, might be around what are called core hours. So you might say you work in an office, and typically it's there for people are there from 8 to 5, but your employer might say our core hours are 10 to 3, which means if they say something like that, you can work 8 to 5, or you could offset everything an hour and work 9 to 6, or offset everything ahead and you could work 7 to 4, or even 6 a.m. to 3, or you could work in 9 to 6 or 10 to 7, as long as that 10 a.m. to 3 a.m. core hours are times that you're definitely going to be available, whether that's in the office or remotely where you could get IM'd or otherwise conference in. That way people could count on those core hours are when everybody's there. And then don't schedule meetings, from 8 to 10 or 10 or 3 to 5. That's a pretty small core hour. It's pretty common for a company to say our core hours are 9 to 4. And it's also common for companies not to do that. But that would be a flex time where you're combining that core with times that the employer could select around that core to get to their 40 if that's the expectation. Okay, let's talk about working in shifts. Shift work, where you have in a given day, you have one group of people in for a certain part of it and another group of people in for another part of it. It's typically only done when the organization needs it, where the organization needs to be operating in whatever it does in something larger than what one employer shift could do. Some retail might be open, say 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Sometimes you can actually do that with one 12-hour shift. You wouldn't have people work. Maybe they're open 7 days a week, so you might have like a 3-day and 3 days at 12 to get your 36 hours, and then a half day, and then the other shift, the other group of people come and work the second half day in the next 3 days. Or you might break it up into shifts, but usually where you see shift work are things like factories that are open 24/7 or like 24/5, so Monday through Friday they're open 24/7. Or like infrastructure. I mean, the power companies and the municipal facilities that keep the sewers working and all that. You have to have a certain number of people there 24/7, and certainly things like hospitals, where you need people around the clock. In which case, you set stuff up typically in shifts. And if your shifts are fixed, like these people work these hours, and if you work there, these are your set hours. Those are usually the least problematic. Certainly less problematic, less challenges associated with them than rotating shifts. The problem is a lot of times you can find it very difficult to like staff your midnight shifts. And sometimes you can find that if you rotate it, you can fill up your staffing easier than if you have fixed staffing. If you have fixed staffing, it might be easy to fill your day shifts, not too bad to fill your evening shifts, and chronically difficult to fill your midnight shifts, your night shifts. But if you do a rotate, maybe it's difficult. Maybe the rotate in a rotating shift is like for 6 weeks you work from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. and then for 6 weeks you work from 2 p.m. to midnight or 11 or whatever, with an hour or whatever. It could be 2 to 10, and then it could be 10 to 6 a.m. for your night shift. And every 6 weeks you like rotate, and that's common with like first responders and that sort of thing. And sometimes that's done just to make sure that you're consistent, and so the people that work night shifts are also people that work the day shifts. So everybody knows everybody and can keep up with training. Sometimes it's just necessary because that's the only way you can maintain a quality workforce. But it's challenging. Certainly, fixed shifts are create less problems. Other than what I just talked about is isolation, that making communications hard for fixed, and whether the uniqueness of your job and your labor market makes it a bit difficult to fill your night shift. Night shift workers, that's a difficult thing to work in opposite of when the sun comes up. And so it tends to be more prone to errors and more prone to serious accidents. So the rate of accidents, serious accidents are higher. If you just count the number of accidents, it's going to be higher during the day because far more people work during the day, but the rate of serious accidents is higher with night shifts. And sleep dysregulation is a common issue with that. And that's both for rotating shifts, because I mean, if every 6 weeks you like come to work at a different time and it shifts over 8 hours, your sleep schedule is shifting. And it's not hard. It's not easy to shift your sleep schedule. You're kind of constantly, jet lagging yourself and having to recover from it. And night shifts or rotating shifts all have sleep dysregulation as a common problem, which creates issues. Fixed night shift is actually less issues than rotating into night shift, because you give your body time to get used to, working at night versus only doing it for like 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 6 weeks. Okay, let's talk about breaks and rest and fatigue. So fatigue itself can be a psychological phenomenon or a physiological phenomenon. And when you really dig in there, it's tough to actually disambiguate the two. But a psychological fatigue is like weariness, or it could be like boredom, an agitated sort of state. But you're like, I want to quit doing what I'm doing psychologically. I don't want to be where I'm at. I don't want to be in this state. I don't want to think these thoughts, or whatever it is. It's just that boredom itself, if you think about it, is often kind of an agitated state, because your systems are trying to get you to, hey, quit doing what you're doing. You're wasting time. You're wasting resources. You're doing stupid things. We're not on a path. We're not getting anything done. So it's poking you all the time, and so that you can't just sit and exist and be mindful, so to speak. That fatigue itself is akin to boredom and weariness. Psychological. Physiological fatigue, everybody knows this is being physically tired, and it's generally you need to sleep, or hey, you need to eat, or hey, you need to quit straining yourself or drink something or whatever. Both of those types of fatigues, whether you're psychologically or physiologically fatigued at work, can lead to errors and accidents, can increase the likelihood of people just not showing up for work, and it can reduce the productivity of the people there. Another important thing about fatigue is that if you want to prevent it, you need to have rest before the fatigue sets in. Once the fatigue sets in, just a quick break doesn't necessarily make the fatigue go away. But often, if you can take a break before you feel the fatigue, that often can keep the fatigue at bay. So timing it is important, and staying ahead of it is important. And that should make sense to you. I mean, to avoid feeling fatigued because you're sleep deprived, don't become sleep deprived. Make sure you get enough sleep. So some cases, this is sort of tautological or obviously baked into the definition of it. But it's important to recognize that if you're being reactive about fatigue, you're suffering more than you would be if you're being proactive and trying to anticipate that fatigue could come if you don't take a break, or you set up your work schedule to have the people that work in your organization take appropriate breaks. Another thing with psychological fatigue is if you have people do something that requires vigilance, like looking for quality defects, but they have to pay close attention, right? They're monitoring things, they're tending to something, but it doesn't have much complexity to it. It's tedious. That can actually lead to boredom. It's like, hey, quit. Your systems are like, what are you doing? Just staring at this thing. Quit it. And you can get agitated and irritated, and your mind wanders. And then trying to vigilantly bring your mind back to something tedious is actually a very effortful, fatiguing thing. And all this work that's happened, with Taylorism, scientific management, treating the human like a cog, simplifying, decomplexifying, production systems in a factory, or how French fries are made at a fast food restaurant, the work that's been done to simplify that has had the benefit of you don't have the training burden. You can bring someone up to speed on it quicker. So think of like a big fulfillment center, like an online shopping fulfillment center. It was typically set up with highly automated, and the things that people have to do is pretty tedious and routine. And so that somebody could come in on the same days in some cases and actually be productive that day. So it's not complex. The problem with that, that decomplexifying, it takes the challenge out, but usually there's still something that has to be attended to so that there aren't quality errors or there aren't accidents. And so that vigilance, stand here and stare at this product line for defects, or take this widget out of half-built widget out of this machine and set it on this conveyor belt to go to the next machine, or whatever, or move this thing over to here. That constant vigilance of having to do that right, but at the same time having it be really simple, is not a thing we're really very good at, most people. And so it can be psychologically very fatiguing, and very, basically boring jobs, which is difficult to have a job be boring and have people be motivated to do the job, be willing to do the job without too much money, be wanting to stay in the job, and then to attend and give high quality work and not have errors or accidents. Okay, let's finish this up with commuting. So commuting is actually a big part of most people's job. In America, at least prior to COVID, the average commute time was 27 minutes. And that means there's lots of people where it takes me 9 minutes or 15 minutes to get to work, and that's just normal. But you got lots of people that take over an hour. I mean, there are people in certain big cities that, the most beautiful commute was like 50. It was an amazing commute today. It only took me 56 minutes to get to work. It was beautiful. It was just like the road parting like butter, or whatever the metaphor. I don't think butter parts. Anyway. But then the next day, there was an accident over here, and then there was some icy stretch, and it took me 2.5 hours to get to work. I mean, those things are real. People around the San Francisco Bay Area, LA, a number of other large cities, depending on how far your commute is from where you live to where you work. It can just be really long things and it ends up being a huge part of the commitment you're making to your job. And commuting itself, I mean, talk about vigilance, and tedium. I mean, to stay in your lane and move around to get to your destination, once you're used to that, it's actually not that hard. But then throw in the fact that at any moment somebody could come careening around the corner and cause a big accident and you could die. So you have a vigilance there that's necessary in order to have a high quality commute that doesn't result in an accident that could be seriously detrimental to your life and your loved ones. But at the same time, while you have to attend to that to make sure that you don't have an accident, it's not complex. And so you have a real fatigue-inducing event that's on the bookends of your work day. And if that's really long, that's a big part of the commitment you make. And typically companies aren't even paying you, so you're sort of factoring in that as how hard it is to whether you want the job and what you're paid for. So commutes are big deals. And you can get that, the stress you get from morning commute can affect how well you do during the day. I mean, if you have a really stressful commute and you're really attending, you can come out psychologically fatigued. And if it's a really like white knuckle type thing on lots of traffic and really bad ice or something, you can be physiologically fatigued because you're just like tense the whole time. And now you're at work and you need to build a pivot table, which is an Excel spreadsheet thing, or you need to attend to and actually pay attention to this PowerPoint somebody's giving you that you actually need to know this information, and you just want to nap, or you just want to zone out because you've had it for a while and you need to take a break, but you can't. So now you're fatigued, but you're at work trying to do productive things for the organization. So commutes are important things to consider when you're making career decisions. A stressful commute can obviously impact fatigue levels, can impact your subsequent quality of sleep. Having to spend that much time in neither at work nor at home can create conflict of how much work you're able to get done and how much of your home obligations able to do, and the end result could be work-family conflict, not even taking into account when you've had a really stressful commute and you come into work and you're stressed, or you get home and you're stressed. And then it can affect your overall organizational commitment, which is how well you really like your job, and are you going to stay here, and are you going to give it your all, or is this commute just awful, and you just need to zone every morning? You need to find a place in the corner and stare at your laptop and make it look like you're working, but you're really just completely zoning out for an hour because you just have to decompress from your commute. Well, your productivity's down, your organizational commitment is down. So all these things affect your state of well-being, as well as the benefit that you bring to your organization. Okay, so that was commuting. Let's recap what we talked about. I told you it would be a short lecture. It was only 20 minutes. We're done with chapter 11 now. So that was workplace challenges. We talked about schedules. We talked about shift work and breaks and rest and fatigue. And we just finished talking about commuting. Next lecture, there won't be a bonus lecture here. We jump right into chapter 12, and we talk about safety at work. Specifically, we're going to talk about the safety statistics. We're going to talk about workplace conditions and how it relates to safety, and we're going to talk about personal factors and how they relate to safety, and we're going to talk about accident prevention, and we're going to end it talking about workplace violence. All right, that's the end of the lecture, and we will see you for the next one.